Hey, welcome to the City Rev Life podcast. I'm Pastor Robey, and I have what you've all been waiting for, Pastor Dan. I mean, how have we had this many podcast episodes and we have not had Pastor Dan and his beard?
It's true.
That beard in and of itself, like in a future podcast episode, I'd like to just interview your beard. Is that okay?
We can do that.
And you know, and part of it is because I'm a little scared as to what's going to happen when the two of us are on this podcast episode.
It's very true. There's a lot of stories we could tell.
Don't go there. I wasn't thinking stories.
Oh.
That Dan and I have a Cold War on stories because if one of us fires first, it's mutually assured destruction. So.
That's true.
Anyway, we are here, but here's the focus of this particular podcast.
Can we just acknowledge
episode.
for a second, before you invited my beard on the show, you shaved off your beard.
Yeah, because my beard was intimidated of your beard. And my beard told me it would refuse to be on the same podcast episode as your beard because it would be so upstaged. So that's what happened. Right. I was just intimidated. I mean, do you oil the beard? Is there a beard oil that goes in there?
We can do a whole podcast episode.
Oh, you're right. We can't get distracted. Yeah. There's just too much to talk about with your beard. So anyway, the purpose of this episode is to talk about reopening as a church. So we released recently a video about that we are not going to continue public services in the near future. And so we're going a little bit deeper dive because I'm sure that creates a lot of questions. And so, and here's the reality, as a church, we are going to have a wide variety of opinions on this. And that is just true across the board. We're going to have a wide variety of opinions. So we acknowledge that. What it means for unity on any subject is sacrificing our personal preferences and opinions for the sake of unity. At the same time, what we want to do is just have transparency and openness on how we're processing through this. So for starters, maybe Dan, can you share kind of what your involvement has been dialoguing about reopening in the local space within the Church United churches? How, just what's been your dialogue, your involvement there?
Yeah, it's been really interesting. At the beginning, I think everybody didn't know what to do.
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking, okay, this is a couple weeks. And as it progressed, everybody started to ask questions and start to realize nobody really knows what they're doing right now. Mm-hmm. Everybody's trying to figure it out. So recently, I had the opportunity to meet with a couple other executive pastors from other churches in South Florida and start dialoguing about, okay, what would it look like for churches to reopen? And how could we learn from each other? How could we help each other? How could we figure it out together? And then I was also invited to a national conversation with several executive pastors talking about what does that look like across the nation in different states and different restrictions. And it's been really interesting. And out of that, we've been able to produce kind of best practices for Church United, for Broward churches to be able to open and what that looks like, how to reopen in a way that follows all the guidelines and recommendations. So it's been a very interesting experience and it gives you a lot of details and insight into how coronavirus works and what it looks like to have an environment that you can create that is safe, mm-hmm. that is reasonable, and that is clean for people to be able to come back to church.
Yeah, and I would say that's been one of the beautiful things about this, and one of the things I love about being in a region where the churches are unified. And through this, the pastors across our region have been just working together and asking each other. I just a few moments ago got a text from another pastor, different denomination, that just said, hey, what are you guys thinking about reopening and sharing? And hey, share with us the video you shared with your church. And so I think we're all learning from each other. And what I can speak to from behind the scenes as pastors is all of us as pastors are acknowledging, hey, we're going to do different things as churches. Some churches are opening, some churches are not opening. Some churches are opening right away, some are going to open a little later, some later than that. That's okay. And I think each of one of us are learning from each other, seeking each other's counsel. And so the churches that open sooner than us or later than us, great. That each one is seeking the Lord and trying to figure out, what to do. And so let's walk through just some of we talked about this a little bit in the update video, but what are some of the best practices? What does it look like for churches that are opening? What are some of the types of things that that a church would do to stay safe in a season like this?
Yeah. So the biggest thing that we see right now is in all of the plans and all of the phases, they really encourage physical distancing. And the physical distancing is the hardest thing to overcome in a large church gathering because everybody comes in at the same time to attend a service at the same time to do the same activity in close proximity to each other. So unlike a grocery store or retail place or a coffee shop, it's different because everybody comes in at the same time to do a shared experience in close proximity, then leave. So physical distancing really is a limiter to your space.
Yeah, it would be like if it was a grocery store, it'd be like we all arrive and meet in the same aisle at the same time, and then leave at the same time.
Yeah.
That's why it's a grocery store is completely different. A restaurant is different.
Right. So it all starts in the parking lot where you'd have to space out cars in the parking lot. You couldn't park in every space because everybody's getting in or out of the car at the same time. So you space out cars in the parking lot, and then you have to monitor flow of people from the parking lot into the building. So you'd have some people who are just waiting in their cars until volunteers are able to welcome them into the building. And then once you come in, all of the places we're used to in the front lobby, getting coffee, the restrooms where you're able to congregate and talk and catch up, need to be eliminated. So you'd be walking in and go straight to a seat, and you wouldn't have time where you're standing around, and you try and limit the number of people in hallways and lobbies. And then when you're in your seat, you've got physical distancing around you. So there's nobody in the row in front of you, nobody in the row behind you, and there's 6 feet of distance between you and the group next to you. So you really have a very small number of people you can put in the auditorium, but then you've got to spread them out over the entire auditorium. So you're never in a place where you feel like you're with a crowd. You're always in a place that feels like it's sparsely populated. In addition to that, you've got to wear a mask the entire time. Not only is wearing a mask in close proximity important, but singing and speaking loudly is actually even more dangerous because just the amount of air and the amount of things that are coming out of your mouth, that having a mask on for the entire service would be essential to doing that. And there are other places in the country where masks are not as needed because there's not as much coronavirus activity there. But in our area, masks are required, and masks are important. So it would be important for us to have masks on the entire service, which makes it awkward.
Yes.
And then at the end of the service, you're used to being able to talk to people and we all file out. But actually at the end of the service, you'd have to dismiss people by row. Again, there'd be nowhere to stop in the lobby, nowhere to stop in the hallway. It's just straight back to your car, and then you're done. That's it.
Yeah, and no kids ministry because, we both have kids. Kids' appreciation for social distancing is very minimal. Now, just to be clear, these best practices, they're not what the government is putting on churches. What you're describing is what you as executive pastors and thinking through the logistic of churches and hearing what medical professionals in our own churches, we've got medical professionals that are working directly, either running parts of hospitals or working directly with COVID patients. These are the types of things that within our churches we're being advised to do. And then as pastors responding, okay, then what do these best practices look like in our services? These are not the restrictions we're getting. These are what we're saying would be best practices in order to meet in safety. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, a lot of the restrictions are interesting because we have amazing freedom in this country where the state cannot regulate religion, which is awesome. And it's great because it gives us a lot of freedom as a church to be able to worship. But they can regulate for public safety, group size, and meeting together. So all of these best practices we've talked about are trying to adhere to all of the very strong recommendations from health organizations and from municipalities and from states, but they're not mandates for churches. So we could violate all of those and just meet like it was the beginning of February again. But that just seems, according to the entire medical community, that seems very, very unwise. Mm-hmm. And there are a couple instances where churches have opened back up, and I don't know about their adherence to any guidelines, but they've opened back up, and somebody ends up testing positive for COVID-19 quickly after, and then everybody who attended that service is then asked to be isolated, and the church has to close back down and do a deeper clean and be closed for longer. And that's just not something we want to risk right now.
I think that's important, those things that you said. I would like to just say, just more directly, I think there's a narrative out there that churches are being persecuted. And to me, I just do not connect with that narrative, because I think that for starters, I have found locally and at the state level at least, there has been a consideration for churches meeting. But in my mind, like, I was never even thinking about that. In my mind, it's about what is the most loving thing for our city. Our number one, we've always said, our number one concern is not how fast can we start meeting again. It's what is the healthiest thing for our city. That's number one. But number two, to compare this to persecution or a suppression of rights when we're being asked to not to shut down and close our doors, or being asked not to meet in person publicly, to me, to call that persecution in this season is a dismissal of what some millions of Christians are legitimately facing in our world right now. I mean, we support churches in or missions in Burkina Faso. Right now in Burkina Faso, Africa, the pastors in those churches are waiting for the Sunday when a terrorist rolls up and guns them down. That is persecution. Those churches that cannot meet because they don't know if terrorists are going to barge in. To me, that's a different story than us saying, we're going to love on our city and find alternative ways to continue meeting so that we don't spread a global pandemic. And furthermore, we're not shutting down.
Right.
We're meeting. We are continuing to meet, and meeting online, meeting digitally is a legitimate. It's not ideal. It's not our preference. There's things that we all miss. I miss being all crammed together and singing and hugging people and all that stuff. I miss all that. I miss our kids ministry for my kids. My kids miss the kids ministry and all those things that we want. It's not ideal, but we're still meeting. And to me, I think I wish that was not part of the narrative, because I think this is a way we can show love to our city. Because even the Christian medical professionals in our own church are telling us that it's not a debate. This part is not a debate. The less crowds that are meeting, whether it's in a movie theater, at a sporting event, or in a church, the less crowds that are meeting, the less COVID is going to spread. So it is then our joy to serve our community and love on them by finding an alternative way to meet digitally.
Yeah. And it's also not just churches. It's all religions. So in order for it to be persecution, it's got to be limited to one group. But it's all religions, it's all groups, it's all large gatherings. It's not just churches, it's also sporting events. It's not just religion, it's also concerts and large gatherings and conferences. Right. So it's a public health issue where it's about serving the community. And it's surprising, we have had such a luxury of personal freedom in our country, where we're so rarely given a curfew, we're so rarely given any kind of limitations on what we personally do, aside from common law. That it feels so foreign to have these restrictions. And really they're restrictions that are for our community's benefit rather than for our personal detriment. So it's uncomfortable and it's difficult. And I think that kind of discomfort, coupled with the fact that we don't know that much, we're used to knowing more about how things function, and we're just learning so much about how this virus takes effect and how it transmits and how people's bodies respond to it, that it's scary to not know exactly what we're dealing with, but to see cause and effect. And then it's scary to not know exactly when it's going to end, what that looks like, and when we can get back to things like they used to be.
Right.
So all of that fear mixed in with the frustration and the stress and the pain and the anxiety of not being able to live life the exact way I want to do it when I've been able to do that for so long.
Right.
It just creates this perfect storm of feeling like you're oppressed, rather than feeling like you've been given so much freedom and there's a time where you give up your freedom for the sake of your community. Right.
And I think, I remember hearing you earlier, Dan, mention to me, there's a passage, I think it's in Romans 14, and then the same concept is also in 1 Corinthians, where love means we give up something for the sake of someone else. And so for the sake of someone who's part of a vulnerable population, whether for age reasons or health reasons, which we have many in our church, and all of us have people in our life. And for the sake of that person, if we give up our preferences of meeting physically together and continue to meet digitally, then it is our joy to love on our community like that. And just like you said, we don't know much about COVID-19. We're still learning as a globe about this particular situation. And so when I hear you describe a lot of those things, and as we've dialogued over time about this is what it would look like to responsibly and safely meet, I know churches that are figuring out how to do something outdoors, and yet every single person that comes on the property, they're taking their temperature. There's a lot of those things, and some churches are going to try some innovative things, which is awesome. And we're going to be watching and learning from that. But in the meantime, I think our conviction has been that until we can do a service that is that doesn't have those limitations and can actually be an effective, excellent worship experience, we're going to hold off. And not that, and we're still going to figure out innovative ways in the meantime. But until we can do a service like that, then we're going to hold off.
Yeah, and it's important to remember it's not that we're not going to keep doing church.
Yes,
it's just the one aspect, the public gathering. Physically is the thing that we're holding off on because we want to be wise, and we feel like this is the best route for us to take. And we're learning from others, but we are still continuing to preach the gospel.
Yes.
And we are experiencing an unusual season of fruitfulness as we preach the gospel.
Right.
There are more people coming to know the Lord in this time than when we were meeting physically. So it would almost be ignoring what the Lord is doing.
That's good.
To say we are not effective right now because we cannot meet physically, when we're actually seeing a greater harvest right now with people coming to know the Lord than when we were meeting physically. So I long to get back to seeing people and saying hi and being able to hug them and spend time with them and hear and laugh. But until it's wise for us to do that and helpful for our community to do that, we're going to continue to do that digitally.
Yeah, and I agree. And I think when we rest in the fact that we are continuing to be obedient to the Scripture, we live in an age where we can uphold the Scripture's mandate to continue meeting together. Hebrews says, do not forsake the gathering and continue to meet together. We are digitally. He's given us a way. We live in an era where we can continue gathering together. It's not how I would prefer. It's not that I can't wait to be back together. Really cannot wait. And I'm getting very weary. But I think as we go before the Lord, prayerfully make wise decisions, then we're in hope and expectation, looking at, okay, God, what are you doing then in this season? Just like you're saying. So I think that's helpful. Okay, so Dan, as we're wrapping up this episode, anything else you want that you think is important for us as City Rev to be thinking about as we're thinking about a reopening?
Yeah, I would say the biggest thing that I would encourage you to do is pray for our community. Pray for our community leaders that they would have wisdom. Pray for the response of the community, that they're responding appropriately and humbly, and that we're able to support our community. And then also pray for those that are hurting in our community, those that are either have come into a financial hardship or relational hardship or even a health hardship, that we would be praying for them in this time. And then also, I would say let's not lose sight of the fact that meeting digitally is a great way to meet. It's when we don't take it seriously that it becomes a disappointment. But if you plan out the day, if you spend time thinking about how you're going to have breakfast and have a really good cup of coffee and sit down and watch the service together, or if you want to turn the volume up real loud so you can sing loudly in your living room as you're watching the service, those are great ways to take advantage of the fact that you have a way to connect with your church and that you can worship as a family together, and you can still sing loudly, you can still hear the word taught, you can still enjoy community with your family. It's just different.
I think that's so good. And in this season, church, this is what the Lord has for us as a church community. So I think that's great pastoral advice to us. It's not ideal. I think we're all digitally fatigued. I think we're tired of just watching things online. And I think, and it is a challenge. We both have young kids. It's a challenge. I think every season of life has a different challenge. Having small kids is a challenge. But church, continue to rest in the fact that God is at work. continue to find creative ways to figure out what's the right rhythm. Some of you may wait till the kids go down for a nap and then watch the service later. Stay engaged so that you can spiritually thrive. Thank the Lord for instead of us being weary and frustrated, let's thank the Lord we live in an era where there's technology like this. And then my urge to us as a church is, please, we're going to disagree on this. You may hear this and you may think we're being too careless or too conservative. And we're all going to have different opinions. But church, let us pursue unity for the sake of the bride of Christ. It's bigger than any one of our personal opinions or preferences. Let's pursue unity for the sake of Jesus. And so, as we're processing through this, let's be, like you said, Dan, let's be praying for our community. Let's be praying for our church, be praying for those who are struggling with the loss of loved ones, who are struggling through health issues. And let's pray for our leaders. We're told that we are to honor our leaders, and we will honor our leaders. And so let's be praying for them as well. So anyway, I hope this helps bring a little bit more clarity as to kind of how we're processing this. I don't think anybody has it all figured out. We are certainly not perfect in how we're processing it, but we are going to continue along the way to figure out and to innovate and try new things. And so we want to be communicating that out as much as we can. So, hey, thank you for joining this episode of the City Rev Life podcast, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for joining us on City Rev Life. You can subscribe to this podcast, rate and review wherever you're listening to this. And we love it when you share it with your friends on social media. For more videos and content, go ahead and check us out at cityrev.org/podcast or download our City Rev Church app. Have a great day.